For 16 years, Ed Sullivan never cried on camera, never faltered, never broke down, never let America see him weak. He had one iron rule that kept him in control. Leave your feelings in the dressing room. Then his best friend died. June 14, 1964. The first show after the funeral, Ed was supposed to introduce the acts, smile for the cameras, and give America the perfect Sunday night they expected. But 20 minutes into the broadcast, something inside him shattered. What 60 million people witnessed that night wasn't in the script. It wasn't rehearsed. It was the moment television's most controlled man discovered that some pain is too honest to hide, and that breaking your own rule might be the bravest thing you ever do. June 14th, 1964. Studio 50 in Manhattan, a Sunday evening like hundreds that came before it. The audience files into their seats with the quiet excitement of people who know they're part of something special. Families across America are gathering around their television sets, finishing dinner, settling children onto couches and living room floors. In 60 million homes, the ritual is the same. Sunday night means Ed Sullivan. Sunday night means the whole country watches together. Backstage, the machinery of live television hums with practiced efficiency. Cameramen check their positions for the 100th time. The orchestra tunes instruments in that particular cacophony that means a show is minutes from air. Lighting technicians make final adjustments. Stage managers pace with clipboards, counting down the seconds until the red light blinks on, and another episode of The Ed Sullivan Show goes live to the nation. Ed Sullivan stands in the wings, reviewing his cue cards with the same methodical focus he brings to every single broadcast. At 52 years old, he has become more than a television host. He is television itself, the reliable constant in an uncertain world. The man who brings America together every Sunday at 8 o'clock. The gatekeeper who decides which performers will become legends and which will fade into obscurity. His posture is ramrod straight, as always. His expression is unreadable, as always. Those who work with him have learned to read the small signs, a tightening of the jaw, a slight adjustment of his tie, the way his fingers tap against the cards in his hand. But even these tells reveal almost nothing. Ed Sullivan is a fortress. Ed Sullivan is control incarnate. Tonight's lineup is strong. A jazz quartet to open, a promising young singer making her network debut, a comedy sketch that tested well in rehearsals. Everything has been timed to the second, choreographed with military precision. The show will run exactly as planned, just as it has for 16 years, just as it always does. But the crew notices something. Bob Precht, the show's stage manager and Ed's own son-in-law, exchanges quiet glances with the production team. Ed's usual brusque efficiency carries a different weight tonight. His movements are slower, more deliberate. When he thinks no one is watching, his gaze drifts somewhere distant. There's a heaviness in the air that no one can quite name. They all know what happened 5 days ago. They all know where Ed was on Tuesday morning. They all know that tonight is the first show since the funeral, since Ed Sullivan stood in a cemetery and watched them lower his best friend into the ground. The question hanging unspoken in Studio 50 is simple. Can Ed Sullivan do what he's always done? Can he walk onto that stage and be the same unshakable presence America depends on? The red light is about to blink on. In 90 seconds, they'll have their answer. The red light blinks on. Ed Sullivan walks to his mark with the same practiced precision that has opened 400 episodes before this one. His shoulders are square. His suit is impeccable. His face carries that familiar expression. Not quite smiling, not quite stern. Something uniquely Ed Sullivan that America has come to recognize and trust. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he says in that distinctive stiff cadence, slightly awkward yet somehow authoritative. The studio audience applauds on cue. Everything proceeds exactly as written on the cue cards. Ed introduces the opening act, a jazz quartet from Chicago. His delivery is professional, competent. The musicians take the stage. The music fills Studio 50 with the kind of sophisticated energy that has made the show famous. Everything is normal, everything is fine, except it isn't. The audience can't quite identify what's wrong, but they feel it. Ed's movements lack their usual crispness. His eyes drift slightly off camera between introductions. The smile that never quite reaches his eyes doesn't appear at all tonight. There's a fragility in the air, like glass stretched too thin, like something precious about to shatter. The first act finishes to warm applause. Commercial break. The moment the cameras cut away, Bob Precht moves quickly across the studio floor toward his father-in-law. The concern on his face is unmistakable. "Ed," he says quietly, urgently, "you don't have to do this tonight. We can tell them you're sick. We can run a repeat. Nobody would—" Ed cuts him off with a look, sharp, final. The show goes on. Always. It's the creed he's lived by for 16 years. Through personal illness, through family crises, through national tragedies, Ed Sullivan has never canceled, never postponed, never shown weakness. The audience depends on him. 60 million people are watching tonight. Professional obligation outweighs everything else. Always. Bob wants to argue, but he knows it's useless. Ed Sullivan doesn't break. Ed Sullivan doesn't bend. Ed Sullivan does the show. The red light blinks on again. Ed returns to his mark, introduces a young comedian making his television debut. His voice remains steady. His posture stays correct. The legendary control holds. But in the control booth, the director leans forward in his chair, watching the monitors with growing unease. Something in Ed's eyes has changed. Something in the way he's gripping the podium between acts. The fortress is showing cracks. 23 minutes into the show, Ed introduces a singer, a sweet-voiced woman performing a ballad about lost love and memory. As her voice fills the studio with gentle melancholy, the camera occasionally cuts to Ed, watching from the wings. And for just a moment, barely 2 seconds, his jaw tightens in a way the crew has never seen before. The weight of 5 days ago is catching up to him, and there are still 40 minutes of live television remaining. To understand what's about to happen, you need to understand who Jack Late was. Not to America, but to Ed Sullivan. In the early 1930s, Ed Sullivan was nobody. A 20-something sports writer trying to transition into entertainment journalism, barely scraping by during the worst years of the Depression. He had ambition and hustle, but New York was full of ambitious young men who wanted to write about Broadway. Most of them failed. Most of them disappeared. Jack Late was already a legend, editor of the New York Daily Mirror, one of Broadway's most feared and respected voices for 3 decades. A man who could make or break careers with a single column. A man who had seen 1,000 hungry writers come and go. But Jack Late saw something in Ed Sullivan, something nobody else saw. When Ed pitched the idea of an entertainment column called Little Old New York, Jack fought to get it published. When Ed's early columns fell flat and the paper wanted to drop him, Jack protected him. When Ed struggled to break into the elite circles of Broadway, the clubs, the premieres, the inner sanctum where real connections were made, Jack Late opened doors that would have remained closed forever. More than that, Jack taught Ed the rule that would define his entire career. Never bring your personal life onto the stage. The audience doesn't pay to see your problems. They pay to be entertained. You leave yourself in the dressing room, and you give them the show they deserve. For a young man trying to survive in the brutal world of New York entertainment journalism, it was gospel. It was armor. It was the code that kept you professional when everything else was chaos. And in 1948, when CBS was searching for someone to host a new variety show, someone reliable, someone connected, someone who could handle the pressure of live television, it was Jack Late's recommendation that put Ed Sullivan's name forward. Without that endorsement from New York's most trusted entertainment voice, Ed Sullivan would never have gotten the chance. The show that would become an American institution wouldn't exist. The debt was absolute. The friendship was everything. Jack Late died on June 9, 1964, at the age of 77. Ed Sullivan stood at his funeral and watched them lower into the earth the man who had made his entire life possible, the man who had believed in him when no one else did, the man who taught him how to survive. And now, 5 days later, Ed is doing what Jack taught him to do: leave the grief in the dressing room, walk onto the stage, give America the show they deserve. But something is breaking inside him, and in 12 minutes, 60 million people are going to watch it happen. After the commercial break, Ed Sullivan should introduce a comedy sketch. That's what's written on the cue cards. That's what the audience expects. That's what the script demands. Instead, Ed stands at his mark in complete silence. 3 full seconds pass, an eternity in live television. The studio audience shifts uncomfortably in their seats. In the control booth, hands hover over buttons, unsure whether to cut away. Something is happening that wasn't rehearsed. "Before we continue," Ed finally says, his voice lower than usual, rougher, "I need to talk about someone." Bob Precht signals frantically from offstage. "Stick to the script. We're running long already. There's no time for this." But Ed doesn't look at him. For the first time in 16 years, Ed Sullivan is deviating from the rundown. For the first time in 16 years, Ed Sullivan is bringing his personal life onto the stage. "His name was Jack Late," Ed says, and those who know the name understand immediately what this moment means. Jack Late, legendary columnist, editor of the Daily Mirror, one of Broadway's most powerful voices for 40 years. To most of America, he's a name they've seen in print, a byline they've recognized. Important, certainly, but distant, the way all newspaper men are distant to the people who read them. Ed's voice cracks slightly on the name. "He was my friend." The studio goes quiet. This isn't the Ed Sullivan they know. This isn't the controlled professional host who has guided them through 16 years of Sunday nights. This is something else, something raw. "Jack taught me the most important rule in this business," Ed continues, his hands gripping the podium now, knuckles white. "Never bring your personal life onto the stage. The audience doesn't pay to see your problems. They pay to be entertained. You leave yourself in the dressing room and you give them the show they deserve." He pauses. His jaw works. 60 million people are watching. "I've kept that rule every single week since 1948, Ed says, his voice starting to fracture. "I kept it because Jack told me it was the only way to survive in this business. I kept it because he was right. Through everything, through every hard night, every personal crisis, every moment I wanted to fall apart, I kept that rule." Another pause, longer this time. The legendary composure is crumbling in real time, and everyone in Studio 50 can see it happening. "But Jack's gone now," Ed says, and his voice breaks completely. "And He stops. He can't continue. The iron control that has defined his entire career is dissolving before America's eyes. What happens next will change television history. Ed Sullivan begins to cry. Not subtle tears that can be blinked away. Not the careful emotion of a performer who knows how to use vulnerability. This is complete, devastating breakdown. His shoulders shake. His voice catches and dissolves. Tears stream down his face as he stands there, exposed and helpless, before 60 million people. "He was my friend," Ed says through the tears. "He was the best friend I ever had, and I didn't get to tell him." The sentence disappears into grief. The words become impossible. The man who has interviewed presidents without flinching, who has maintained unbreakable composure through 16 years of live television, who has become synonymous with professional control, that man is gone. In his place stands someone America has never seen, a human being in pain. The studio audience sits frozen. This isn't entertainment. This isn't part of the show. This is something private, something sacred, something they're witnessing by accident. Several women in the audience are crying now too. Men who came expecting comedy and music find themselves confronting something far more profound. In the control booth, nobody knows what to do. Cut to commercial? Keep the cameras rolling? This has never happened before. There's no protocol for Ed Sullivan breaking down on live television. For 30 seconds, 30 excruciating, beautiful, devastating seconds, Ed Sullivan weeps openly. The man who never showed emotion, the man who lived by Jack Late's rule absolutely, the man who is breaking that rule because the person who made it is gone. Finally, Ed manages to speak again. His voice is raw, stripped of all performance. Jack taught me never to do this. He'd be furious with me right now. A small, broken laugh escapes through the tears. But maybe that rule was wrong. Maybe the most important thing we can show people is that we're human too. He looks directly into the camera, not at the studio audience, but through the lens, as if speaking to someone who can no longer hear him. His face is wet with tears. His composure is shattered, and somehow he has never seemed more powerful. "Thank you, Jack," Ed says quietly. "For everything. I wouldn't be here without you. Nobody would know my name. You gave me everything." The studio is completely silent, not the silence of awkwardness, but the silence of witnessing something true. The silence of 60 million people realizing that behind the famous face they've watched every Sunday for 16 years is a man who loves, who loses, who breaks, just like they do. Ed tries to continue the show. He introduces the next act, but his voice is hollow. Everything has changed.